Hi, everyone. This is Susan Anderheggen, founder of the Anderheggen Group and xfactorleader.com. Today I have the pleasure to interview Maya Mathias. Maya's impressive resume includes working for world-class brands like Ogilvy and Mather, IBM, HP, Microsoft, Polycom, Cisco, Singapore Airlines, Intercontinental Hotel Group, and dozens of others. She has a Bachelor of Science in Biology, an MBA with a specialty in Information and Knowledge Management, and is certified by the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching, IPEC, America's #1 coach training school. Welcome, Maya. I have a few questions for you, but let me start with your background because you have quite an interesting background. Can you explain your leadership career and the journey that you took to get here?
Sure, I'm happy to. First of all, I just want to share with everyone that I will share as much as I can in the time that we have now because I could talk about leadership all day and I have tons of info. So I'll show you what I can right now, and then I'll promise to point you to more resources as we go along. So in terms of my leadership career, I was blessed to have, been given leadership roles from a very, very young age, actually as early as 5. My first role was in kindergarten. And at that young age, I really wasn't sure what leadership meant. And so I followed the role models I had in my life at the time. And I ended up being your typical command and control leader, if you will. Even through school, I was given several student leader roles. The equivalent in America would be a hall monitor role. I had that all through school. I was, president of the drama club. And all through those years, I had some guidance along the way from my mentors and from my teachers and later on my bosses about what it means to be a good leader. And I think I have the natural instincts to show tough love when the occasion calls for it. But I realized over time that some of my leadership behavior and communication wasn't really landing well with the people I was leading. I was getting a ton of hit and miss results. And so over time, I naturally turned to becoming a very avid student of leadership and, in a broader context, personal growth. When I went to business school, that helped me add a theoretical dimension to what it means to be a good leader. And even now, I find myself continuing to study in our globally connected economy these days. The notion of global leadership really appeals to me, and my passion is to share what my perspective on global leadership is for people who, no matter where they're working, because I feel that with the hyper-connected age that we are living in, there's actually never been a more exciting time to be a leader because we have access to all this amazing knowledge about not just what it is to work, but how to lead at work. Plus, it's never been a more complex time to be a leader. And we're living in such turbulent times, and sometimes the way we were taught to lead leading up to this point may not serve us going forward. So my journey's been, has had its ups and downs, and I've gone from being a complete command and control sort of leader because I didn't know any better, to accumulating the skills and the knowledge and the attitude to show up for the people that I lead in a more holistic way. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that was great. You mentioned even as early as kindergarten having some natural instincts, and you mentioned being an avid student of leadership, and with all of your experience and what you've learned, can you describe some of the key skills or strengths that you believe are essential for great leadership today?
Absolutely. What I will do is just focus on one key skill or strength that I'm borrowing from the system and the framework that I use to coach and train my clients. And I call it my Lead First system. The first is an acronym, FIRST. It stands for different skills, strengths, and values that I think we all need to be effective 21st century leaders. So I want to spend some time talking about the first element. I can imagine when I say, the importance of being fearless, what comes to mind could be a general leading someone in, leading their battalion in times of war. And even though we're not necessarily on a war or a battlefield these days, it can sometimes feel like that because of so much change that happens in the marketplace, within your industry, or even within your company. And so in that context, when I talk about being fearless, what I mean is being fearless across many dimensions. First, there's the importance of being fearless within yourself. So we are all victims, and we all become victims to self-talk, or that inner critic, if you will, that lives in all of us. And sometimes that can get in the way of us growing into the biggest and best leaders that we can be. Maybe we had hypercritical parents or teachers along the way who said we wouldn't amount to anything. You really need to get to a place where you can be fearless enough and work through and walk through all that negative self-talk to get to a place where you can be courageous and lead in the way that you want to be. So there's that sense of being fearless around your self-talk. Then to extend that to, a bigger sphere, there's also the importance of being fearless in terms of dealing with organizational fire drills or politics. We all know, having worked in the corporate space, I'm sure you can understand when I say, politics is a necessary evil sometimes in the workplace when you get beyond a certain size, company size, when communication lines start to break down or the rumor mill starts to grow, politics just becomes a natural side effect of that. And as a leader, it's important to, first of all, want to be aware that that's going on, and as a leader, decide what you want to do to show up differently and to deal with the politics in a just and an effective manner. So, that level of fearlessness is just as important. Another aspect of fearlessness is in understanding and being aware of the differences between yourself and other members of your staff. Sometimes you may find yourself reacting negatively to someone on the other side of the boardroom table. And if you take the time to reflect on your behavior, oftentimes what can show up for you is actually a sense of fear because you don't really understand them because they grew up very differently or they behave very differently. And, maybe they display a level of behavior that you're not comfortable with. So your immediate response to that is to come from a place of fear rather than a place of strength and courage. So developing that sense of fearlessness between who you are as an individual and the people who you lead are. And working through those differences is an important fact of being a strong and effective leader. And finally, just in the broader context, being fearless of the upheaval that we all face, whether it's within our industry because of competitive pressures or within the larger global context and the marketplace that we all work in these days. Sometimes when these changes happen, for example, if there's a regulatory change that happens, our immediate response is to kind of retract and become fearful and go, oh gosh, what does this mean? Is the company going to go to hell in a handbasket because of it? I mean, that's our immediate and human response to it. We tend to react from a place of fear. But then being able to translate that and transfer that to a place of looking at it not as a challenge, but looking at it as an opportunity. What can we still do? What workaround can we have? Or what new opportunity or new direction can we take the company into in order to stay relevant and stay strong and thriving as an organization? So, just that one element of being fearless, I think, has broad and deep ramifications in various aspects of leadership.
That's great. One that's, to me, very interesting is the first one you spoke about, which is fear of your own self-talk, which is great. It's one of the things that we tend to defeat ourselves with our own self-talk, and then turning fear into an opportunity. What are some of the key mistakes leaders make? And you can do that in terms of fearlessness or in terms of any of the other skills you need. And when they make those mistakes, can you explain what the effect to them is and to others?
Of course. I feel a big mistake that a lot of leaders make is in not being holistic, or in my term, global in their approach, not looking at the big picture or the broader context of what is happening before them. So say two individuals come up to them and it's, they're having a huge argument in terms of the politics between them. So instead of just looking at their conflict, a lot of leaders make the mistake of just diving into that conflict and trying to address it rather than looking at the broader picture and what that context is. So when you don't approach challenges at work from a holistic and global standpoint, you essentially become unable to lead through constant change, because what you end up doing is you're not really listening and responding to the larger reality of what is happening, and you tend to narrow your focus, whereas the best and the most effective leaders these days are constantly balancing the big picture and the small details. They are able to take both that broad and narrow view at the same time. And that really is a skill that a lot of leaders lack these days. And in line with that, because they they tend to have that more parochial and narrow perspective, they tend to start under-communicating because they're not looking at that broader context, so they're not really addressing all the areas of concern. And again, when you come from a place of fear, for example, you tend to retreat into your shell. So as a leader, let's say, taking an example, there's a public relations crisis in your organization, and as a member of the public, we can be really critical. For example, the oil spill in the Gulf. Because there was a delay in communication, trust and mistrust tends to build up in the minds of the public. So when things are changing so constantly, a lot of mistakes that leaders make is not being able to balance the need to think and analyze versus the need to act. And it is a fine balance that you need to strike. So you need to be very conscious of when it's time to act, how to act, and be very conscious of what you're saying when you're acting. And then there are also times when you need to take that step back and go, okay, communication is important, but let's just take a minute, taking that extra minute to really think through what you want to say and how you want to say it will reap a lot more benefit and just reduce that damage control downstream. And in a larger context, when you think about it, because you are under-communicating, because I think this is at the root of the biggest problem we have as business leaders today, and that's the low employee engagement. Because when you're under-communicating and you're not telling people what's going on when they want to know about it, it starts to sideline many folks. People start to get suspicious of what's happening behind closed doors. And, many people feel sidelined. They want to know what's happening, and if you don't tell them, it just has disastrous consequences as a leader. So that's a huge mistake that I think we really need to be mindful of as leaders and start to think through in a more strategic and intentional way as we lead going forward.
Just yesterday I was talking to the CEO of a hospital, and he had to communicate some bad news. And we were talking about the fact that especially in today's day of instant communication, any time that you don't communicate or you postpone communication or you don't communicate enough, people fill that gap. And so if you're not the one communicating, other people fill it in, and he really has to communicate daily because, people forget 3 days later. And then I was talking to someone else who had a new boss who had not been communicating, that there was some bad news going on, and the person felt it was better not to be communicating it, but it was causing quite the stress in the organization, who were all talking to each other and filling those gaps. So that is a great mistake to talk about, because especially in today's age where everyone can communicate so fast in so many ways, lack of communication can really hurt you.
Exactly. And I love the fact that you mentioned, we do live in a world of instant communication. And so if you don't say something, people are going to assume the best or the worst most of the time. So
right.
It is your responsibility to fill that gap as quickly as possible.
So thanks, Maya. So, you mentioned that you have a framework called Lead First, and, we went through a whole bunch of great information about really looking at the broader context and the importance of listening, the balancing of acting and thinking, the importance of communication. Is there anything else you would like to tell everyone here, or any other place you can point them for more information?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. If they're interested in learning more about my work, and I'm happy to share more information about my Lead First system with them, they can go to this URL to download a free audio report where I go into more broader aspects of what I think about when I talk about global leadership, and I can introduce them to the Lead First system a little later on too. So the URL is 3, as in the number 3, keythings.com. And if they fill in their details there, they can get a free audio report and learn more about the work that I do.
That's great, Maya. I'm sure that everyone would find something very informational and interesting in that. So thank you so much again for joining me.
You're welcome, Susan. Thanks again.